All right, cool. So, what did you want to cover then?
Well, I wanted to talk about the real handlers, who for me were the Draco, the
Hmm.
Draconians, and um, uh, yeah, I did do a little meditation with the experience, and I took it um to one of my therapists, um, and basically what I got is that some of the positive Draconians, some
Mm.
are positive, some are negative.
Yeah.
Were working through the Soviets and sending me to other places in time and space,
Mm.
um, particularly to Lyra, to the Lyra constellation, um, in the distant past,
Okay.
essentially in an attempt to change the timeline.
I see.
Um, and so the Soviets basically, or my handlers, I mean, it's making more sense why they were not abusive to me because, or as much because um, they were working for the positive Draco.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and it was an effort to create a different timeline, to create a different outcome for the whole Draco species, so that they would be free as a civilization, as a species.
Okay.
Um, and it's incredibly moving when I think about it. I just cry and cry. Um, so that's what came up a lot when I was feeling into
Wow.
it. Um, And yeah, it was a really beautiful vision. And I haven't talked about it that much, but the positive Draco helped me quite a lot. They're a big part of the reason that I'm free. They're a big part of the reason that I'm safe today.
I
Um,
see.
and yeah, and that's after our last interview, that's what was really coming up. And I talked to my partner about it a little bit. Um, it was it was heartbreaking because essentially the positive Draco mission was a failure.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it was a long shot to begin with, but we didn't change the timeline. We had a massive defeat, and the Draconians civilization, relapsed into its current path, where most of the Draco are completely taken over by hostile entities, evil entities and AI configurations, and
Mm.
I mean, their society is just in a very bad place. And I went back to the Americans, and that was all like that was essentially a struggle through me, with me, um, between the positive and negative Draco factions, with the
Mm.
positive ones being more associated with the Soviets, at least the ones that I was dealing with. Um,
Wow. Do you know these positive Draco? Can you describe them a little bit, like where they're
yeah,
from and
well,
and
they're
stuff?
they're physically pretty similar to the negative ones.
Okay.
They're um, from the Draco constellation, from
Hmm.
the Thuban star. Um, a lot of them are, and they've had a very, very long-term relationship with humanity, and they've conquered a big section of our part of the galaxy. Um, Probably most people who know about them will know some of this stuff.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, they conquered many, many star systems, many worlds, and there's open enslavement on a lot of these planets. On Earth, we have a covert enslavement system, but in a lot of other parts of the Draco Empire, it's open enslavement.
Yeah.
You know who your masters are. It's them.
Sure.
Um, Physically, usually they're taller than average humans. 7 feet is pretty typical, 8 feet sometimes, even up to 9 feet. Um, but yeah, typically 7 or 8 feet. Typically a dusky gray skin tone, um, and yellowish eyes, for the most part. Although there are variations among the species, and some of them
Mm.
have very mottled skin, like different colors on the skin, darker discolorations. They have birthmarks, all sorts of things like we do. But for the most part, they're this kind of dusky brownish green color, yellowish eyes. Um, although, yeah, some have like much darker eyes, like almost black. There are different castes. They have a caste system, so
Right.
um, you've probably heard that too. So, and there sometimes there are physical differences among the castes. Um, Some of them have wings. The royals, usually called royals. Um, Most of them don't. Most of them are pretty, I mean, pretty much like a human physique, although they have very big muscular tails.
Mm.
They're much physically stronger than we are. Their psychic abilities are much louder.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
What I want to know is the positive Draco. Do you know how they split off and where did they end up
yeah.
eventually?
Well, they never. So my understanding of this is not super deep, and it's
Mm.
from a child's perspective, a lot of the memory, but
Okay.
so just to qualify it, but if I understand right, there are a lot of Draco who never became part of the Empire, the Draco Empire,
Okay.
um, who essentially maintain their own ways. They live a lifestyle that we would consider indigenous.
Mm.
They have their own enclaves, their own communities, um, and they live independently as much as possible. Um, the Imperial ones are always trying to hunt them down and fight them, and um, but they also have help, because the other forces that are fighting the Draco, like most obviously the Lyrans, the Pleiadians, the humanoid, mostly humanoid groups, Arcturians, Syrians, the ones that you hear about more as part of the
Mm.
Federation, um, that's a real thing for me. Um, they try to help the positive Draco. There are a lot of the Draco of positive orientation who are living within the Federation, who are working with the Federation.
Mm.
So I'd say a lot of the free ones are under the protection of the Federation. Um, and that's how they persist. Some of them are not, some of them are basically nomadic, and they live kind of in hiding. A few of them are integrated into the Empire, and they basically live as double agents. It's
Yeah.
very
I know
yeah,
about
it's very
this. Yeah, yeah.
complex. Yeah.
There's a whole book that was like a channeled book basically, but there's this German person. His name is David Lauer, if you've heard of him.
No, I'd
He's
love to read that.
he's channeling he's channeling this collective of beings called Kalask, and they're like black full on Draco, but
Oh.
yeah, black skin and stuff. They are part of the Empire, but they've come to this junction where they were fighting another race heavily, a feline race.
Hmm.
And what happened was in that, I guess, in that quadrant where they were fighting, they came to like a stalemate with them, where both sides, like the felines and the Draco, realized that if they continue fighting, they will just, mutually, destroy each other.
Hmm.
And so it just so happened that the Draco could not take them over, and those felines reached out and said, we could help you, balance more. So something happened, some kind of alchemy happened, and they actually went over and reached like a truce, a peace agreement sort of
Mm.
thing. And that's how their journey towards what
Oh.
they call the midpoint between the dark and the light started. So their philosophy is you don't have to go all the way to the light because it's polarity. You don't go to the dark because it's polarity, and the dark is destructive. It has its perks, but you don't get all the stuff from the universe, and the light is
Yeah.
as well. So they
Yeah.
have this middle golden mean kind of approach. What they say is that they are a part of the empire. They are still in the Thuban area,
Mm.
but they have their own civilization, they have their own culture, and they're basically working with these positive federations. And they are also mocking them a little bit because they are who they are reptilian, and those guys are not. And
Mm.
they have a lot of like jokes and stuff about it, but they also say that they've realized that the heart centered approach is what they lack most, and this is
Mm.
what they trying to work on, because they say most of our bravado actually comes from fear. And
Mm.
once we realize that, we realize that a lot of missing pieces about the cosmos were because of this complete negation of the heart center.
Wow.
And yeah, and so basically they were like they're like a more enlightened version of the Draco Empire. So we know about this, that there are groups, and they talk about this, that there are groups in the Draco Empire that are not completely splitting off because it's kind of impossible, militarily speaking, and like everything culturally, but they still have the space where they can maintain what they want to do, like their culture and some new ways. Anyway,
Yeah.
in this remembering experience, do you remember did the Draco appear at the base? Did they take you?
Yeah, they're at the base pretty regularly. I mean,
Oh,
generally they're, in contexts like this, generally they're out in the open. They don't
oh,
have a reason. Yeah, they don't
to
have a
hide.
reason to hide there. Like they do on Earth.
I see.
They're still considered a rumor on Earth. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. A myth.
but in a lot of these situations, when you're out in the colonies or like out on Saturn, in my case,
Mm,
they were openly walking around and just accepted by the people that were there, as far as I could tell. Um,
wow. Did you remember this when we talked about your experiences in June?
I I I did, but I thought I was mixing it up with some other stuff
I see. Okay. They were
to
like
talk
full
about.
on, full on out in the open with the Soviets.
Yeah, at least with the people that were working with me. I mean, I don't know if they were out mingling with everybody at the base, but
Oh, interesting.
in the areas that I was in, um, they would just mingle with my Russian handlers. Yeah.
Hmm. So can you say more? Like what pieces do you remember? Did they direct this work with you? Did they have any specific goal for
Some of
that?
it was most of the hands-on training they left to kind of the human handlers that I talked
Hmm.
about last time.
Hmm.
Um, uh, they have the positive Draco have a much more hands-off approach, and they um, they prefer human trainers. They feel that, humans understand other humans better. Um, the negative ones are much more likely to just step in and,
Hmm.
take your mind over. But
Right.
um, but yeah, but the positive ones kind of have a respect for human ways of doing things, for human space and um, like metaphorical space.
Hmm.
Um, so they would give that space to the
Hmm.
Russian handlers and to me. Um, but when it was time to go back, essentially, so this could be off, but if my intuition is correct, um, when they took us across time and space, it was mostly with the Draco, not with the humans as much.
Hmm.
Um, there are very, very few humans who are actually spiritually called to do stuff like this.
Okay.
Um, I just happen to be one of them for various reasons that I can get into at some point. But um, I'm essentially an interbeing. Um, I have I'm hybridized on a physical level, which is pretty standard for the programs. But also my soul, I have multiple souls in the same body. Um, and so when I speak for many at once, and some are human and some are not.
Hmm.
Um, and that's just how I function as a being. Um,
I know.
so
Yeah.
so I have found myself in a lot of situations where ordinarily someone in a human body would not be experiencing them.
Right.
Um,
What was
yeah.
this mission about at all? Like you would be transferred to the distant past to
Yeah.
Lyra.
It was essentially to create a different outcome in the early Lyran Wars about 30,000 years ago, if my sense of time is correct. Um, when the Lyran felines and the Draconians were fighting, um, basically um, to create either, well, there were different strategies and many things were tried. I mean, people still go back, beings or other kinds of people still go back to that time and try to rework things. It's
Hmm.
it's less common now. So um, time moves in waves. Um,
Okay.
there's one researcher who calls this kata rhythms, Kata rhythms,
Hmm.
and so certain historical events um, are located at a certain point in the wave. And when you're at a certain point in the wave, it's an ideal time to go back and try to do something at another
Mm,
point when you're at the same amplitude of the wave.
okay.
Um, so there are certain moments in time that are better than others for trying to do certain things in
Okay.
the past because time has this relationship with itself, and it can be seen in many ways, but yeah, this is probably a good simple way to think of it.
Okay.
So if you're at a certain point in the wave and 30,000 years ago from where you are that was at the same point in the wave, then there's a spatial relationship kind of between those points in time.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so apparently at this moment in time that I'm remembering, which um, I guess I'm still sort of unclear where it is, but I think it's in the 80s.
Hmm.
Um, at that point in time, for whatever combination of reasons, that was naturally a jumping off point
Hmm.
to this other place and time.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's really something. We can learn a lot about the nature of time itself from these experiences. Um, it's not necessarily the first priority when there's so much, hidden information and trauma and all this stuff, but it's also quite fascinating in its own right.
Sure.
Um,
So what did they
so
try then? Like specifically, do you remember any specific what kind of strategies did they
yeah,
try to
so
use?
well, the two basic things were one, in some scenarios to try to create a victory for the Lyrans,
Hmm.
a military victory.
Okay.
Um, and most of those timelines were actually less um, were a lower vibration than some of the
Mm.
ones where there were different agreements or compromises um, or the Draco Empire collapsing from within. Um, and I really want to read this book because it sounds very much like what I've experienced. Yeah,
Yeah.
but um, so I was there with the Ontarians. I've always been haven't talked about this yet, but I'm very closely associated with beings from the Scorpio constellation.
Hmm.
And one of the people within me, or one of the beings within me is Ontarian. Um, and so yeah, from the Scorpio constellation, very high vibration beings, like eighth dimensional beings.
Okay.
And they help me a lot with a lot of things. They're the main reason that I'm A, alive, and B, mentally, emotionally coherent.
I see.
Um, yeah. So because of that connection, sometimes that's why I would be included in these scenarios because the Ontarians are very masterful at very, very subtle kinds of shifts and changes and timeline uh, manipulations, I guess you can call them, although if yeah, positively intended um, timeline work.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, and there's some I'm still understanding my purpose there because again, a lot, sometimes I would just look out through the eyes of a very scared human child with no knowledge of any of this stuff. So
Right.
so that was like my primary perspective still,
Wow.
um but also within me is a very ancient Ontarian being who would essentially whose main job was to monitor the timelines and kind of keep us on track, like serve as a navigator. Um, so I've served as a navigator in many capacities in different parts of the programs.
Hmm.
Um, because of this connection that I have, it's very easy for me to get oriented um, through the dimensional levels and across the timelines. Um, so that's essentially what I was doing. I mean, that's been a recurring story for me in many different situations. Um, so yeah, it's good to name that part. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that was mainly what I was invited there for. Yeah.
Were you
Um,
supposed to view the probabilities or
Sometimes it's very logical, mathematical. It's but to be To be honest, it's much more like music a lot of the time. Like, hearing the harmonies, hitting the right notes. Um,
Mm,
it's much more of a artistic process,
I see.
um,
So
as
it's
I perceive
kind
it.
of
Yeah.
sensing where the energy is going and going with
Yeah.
it. Okay.
hmm
Yeah, yeah. Instead of just trying to, stiffly correct a certain event, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see. Wow.
hmm
So what was the failure point then for them? So you said that they tried to do this. The first one of the strategies was to simply bring a military outcome. Some others were connected to the compromises, to the alliances.
It was also basically to separate um, the Draco evolutionary path from the Orion evolutionary path. So
Mm,
the Orion are another primarily negative group,
yeah.
and mostly we hear about mostly I've experienced them working together with the Draco and you know, both having quite evil intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there were outcomes possible where um, the Orions and the Draconians stayed separate, um, and also the negative AI beings, which are a whole another layer,
Yeah.
complicating the Draco civilization. Um, so with all those things together, with the very confused Orion beings and the Draconians and the negative AI working together, you have this really toxic soup. And it's like impossible to reason with them. It's very sad. They're just an unthinking, unfeeling army, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there were paths available where those were more separated groups.
Mm-hmm.
The AI was on its own path, Orion was on its own path, and the Draco were on their own path, independent, um, to honor each of their sovereignty, each of their integrity. Yeah, which would be a higher path for everybody. Obviously,
Okay.
because
Well,
sovereignty, free will is
sure.
it's one of
So
our
did they
core
outplay
values.
you temporarily? I mean, did they know about this operation and somehow subverted it, or what happened?
Yeah, uh, the mergers were essentially impossible to prevent, as far as I could
Hmm,
tell.
I see.
Um, the best we could do was to slow it down, um, and even that had, you know, unforeseen effects further down, um, because yeah, it all happened very quickly, which, is very, when situations are very dense with karma, um,
Hmm, that's true.
that they tend to be very accelerated. Um,
Yes, and also I don't know, it seemed like if they tried to do the military approach as well, they were like thinking all these levels probably wasn't the highest choice in the beginning.
well, and
So yeah, so they
I
got
mean,
beat.
and that's part of why the Orion group and the Draconians and the AI came together, partly because it was a military advantage, and they could fight better together. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, so
So trying to
so
beat them on the warfare aspect was probably not the best choice, right?
probably not. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it's the only thing you can do, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That was
But
interesting.
but if we were successful, if I understand this right, the Soviets would not have collapsed. Like, there would still be a Soviet Union, and the
Mhm.
the balance of power on Earth would also be a little different. So that's a part that kind of
Yeah,
affects us directly
I
here
see.
and
So
now.
so what you're
Yeah.
saying what you're saying is that the Soviet Union's collapse was part of the negative group's blowback, or simply part of their plan in the beginning. So they were kind of, I think, in the same book that I was mentioning, they also talked about that the Soviets. Well, it's complicated because all of these scenarios, there are intentions that are in the beginning of any movement, and then they are being taken over. So that's what they point out. By the way, they don't judge these movements and these political systems by their outside labels, because they can switch and change and be, co-opted and stuff. So
Yeah.
I think they were talking about the Soviet Union being in the beginning, of course, the Marxist philosophy, what they say anyway, was very positive. And it was anti-Draco completely, anti-domination and tyranny completely. But then it got taken over, and all these cases where we see, North Korea, China, in their worst days. I'm not saying China today, but in their worst days, North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union were at least in those periods co-opted by the negative forces. So
Yeah.
so their idea was to eventually collapse the Soviet Union, right?
Hmm.
Okay. It was
I mean,
I guess it
one
was
man's
more
opinion.
convenient at that historical point for them to manage, right?
Hmm.
Okay. Did the Soviets also go to that past Lyran timeline?
Uh, for the most part, no. Like, uh, again, there were very few people in human bodies who are called to that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um,
You were in your human body though, right?
yes, I was. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Um, yeah. In the time period in the past, we would be there. From our reference point, anywhere from just like 20 minutes
Hmm.
um, to several hours, or
Hmm.
in extreme cases, maybe a few days,
Oh,
but
okay.
not a long time.
I see.
Um, yeah.
Did you
Um,
try to take someone out in this short period, or talk to someone, or meet someone?
uh, there were assassination missions. I wasn't running them, so I can't really speak to them, but I was aware of them happening, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't they know that putting negative energy input in is what's going to propagate the negative energies too? Like,
Yeah. Well,
you
it's
know,
always a question of whether it's worth it in the bigger
the lesser
picture.
evil.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, that's these moral moral choices are very real.
Yeah.
I violence is I don't think it's always wrong. I just think it has to be used with great care, and very rarely, and almost always it's not the best choice, but yeah.
Okay. I see. So, how long did you stay at the Soviet base, all in all?
Yeah. Um, I'm kind of having trouble like accessing that
Hmm.
knowledge directly.
Okay.
Um, it it was probably about 3 years, like
Okay.
from my reference point. Yeah. Roughly 1986 to 1989,
Hmm.
give or take.
So, did you talk to the Draco there? Do you remember any conversations with them?
Yeah. I mean, they're primarily telepathic.
Yeah.
So soul conversations, very, very deep meditations.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. And um, when there was time, they would take me, to some, like, out of my body to other places, and
Hmm.
teach me a few things that I was curious about, um,
Wow.
like about their people. And yeah, it was very loving.
Do they have a name?
Aside from
Or,
Draco, or like
yeah, do
individuals.
they have their own name or any
Yeah,
kind of denomination? Like,
yeah. Um, hmm. uh, some of them use a term that I would say is pure hearts. Um, it is a good rendering of it.
wow.
Um, yeah, just pretty direct.
Pure
Um,
hearts. Okay.
like, you know what team you're on.
Right, right, right.
Pure hearts. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, essentially, pure hearts were the ones who were free of the empire, and um, uh, the original, like, sound, I guess, it was something like init or something like that. I don't know if I can
Hmm.
pronounce it well, but the feeling of it was like iniktik, or iniktich.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so 86 to 89 was basically towards the very time of the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
it's all woven together,
I
that
see.
it's not random that it, because
Oh, okay.
that falling was part of the same karmic process.
But did
Yeah.
the Americans who exchanged you know about this whole secret operation that they
Uh,
wanted to do?
well, after I went back to the Americans, yeah, they knew about it. I mean, that was a horrible time. The negative Draco, you know, taunted me and
Hmm.
did worse things to me, um and it was very devastating.
So they
And
knew fully well what happened.
the Draco did, yeah, the
Oh,
negative
okay.
Draco.
Wow.
Not necessarily the Americans,
I see.
but yeah, and even in my family, it was really devastating. A lot of this is tied up in my whole family.
Hmm.
Um, my mother's heart was broken in a way she never recovered from, really. Um, she was very, and even just on a regular 3D level on Earth, she was very inspired by some of that early Marxist, you know, Soviet stuff,
Hmm.
um, and took the collapse of the Soviets very hard personally,
I see.
and yeah, and had her whole life upended. So that I mean, this was my family. This was my mother, my biological father, my relatives, siblings, um, were essentially all in this different versions of this program, these programs together.
Oh, okay.
So
Wow.
yeah, so it was a big shift. It was a huge shift in my personal life, also. Um, and yeah, after 89, a lot of things really shifted. And I had another soul come into my body, also around the same time. So
Hmm.
I became larger inside myself. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of coming and going uh, on the soul level, um, along with the physical and political transitions. Yeah,
Interesting. So this was in what you're saying is this was in real time
yeah,
when you were in this real timeline and in the here and now.
yeah,
That also had an energetic shift for you guys.
yeah. It feels good to share that, because I probably haven't really put that all together before,
Oh,
like to another person. So yeah.
I'm curious. Like the Draco probably knew from the beginning that you would be taking part in this operation, right? With the Soviets.
Some of them did. You know, some are more claircognizant than others, of course. But
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So
Um,
they still allowed you to go over and do this.
well, yeah, I'm not totally sure how much it was with knowledge and consent and how much it was a trick.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not really
I
sure.
see.
But yeah.
The fact that you said that you have multiple souls in your body, uh,
Hmm.
is it because your DNA and your etheric DNA is capable of holding these multiple?
That's part of it.
energies. Yes,
Yeah, that's part of it. I do come from, yeah, a very, uh, Atlantean bloodline family, and we do have uh, a little bit more of a physical capacity for these kind of soul
mm,
mergings.
I see. Can you name the bloodline, or
Uh,
like at least hint on it or something?
yeah. Well, if I understand right, it's Merovingian essentially.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
so we're related to like Central European, French and German royalty.
And
Uh,
before that, Jesus.
uh, I'm not totally sure about that, but probably. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Um, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
3 years in this and on the Soviet base, right?
Yeah.
Was that an altar, a separate altar that you were in there, or was it the same
Uh,
altar that the Americans, passed you with?
well, I mean, they used my existing altar system.
I see.
Um, I don't think new altars were created there, as far as I know,
Mm,
because you need basically you need torture to create more altars, or some radical disorienting experience. But yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I probably did a little bit of integration there, to be honest,
mm,
of the altars that had been created before.
I see.
Um,
Wow,
yeah,
interesting. Very
yeah,
interesting for them to actually, pass you over to a positive program there.
yeah. It is
Wow.
crazy. But they traded a lot, during the Cold War. They traded a lot of assets between different groups, like the Americans and the Russians. Obviously
Interesting.
that's just public knowledge, prisoner exchanges and things, but it was also happening in the programs,
Mm.
you know.
Did the
So
Soviets back then work with the Germans in space? I mean, like Nachtwaffen and stuff. They
that's
obviously know about each other. So and
yeah.
it's not a very big space within the solar system. So
No, I
relatively speaking, of course.
um I yeah, I didn't really experience them interacting a lot. Uh I actually I was a very bad they give you all these aptitude tests to find out what you're good at. So primarily I was a navigator, and
Mm,
there are people who are designated to be the liaison between different groups,
mm,
to like negotiate or
yeah.
be a diplomat essentially. And I did very poorly on those tests, so I um, didn't didn't do
Okay.
a lot of that. But
Right. That's why you weren't at the meetings and so on.
yeah,
Right. Okay. I see. Did you mention other time travel missions with the Russians where they would send you to the past in Russia to do stuff?
that was more working for the Americans at Montauk, which is a whole
Oh,
different. Yeah,
oh, I
that
see.
was a different period of my life, a different context. But yes, we went to Russia a lot from Montauk. All,
Mm.
all the Montauk survivors talk about this.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, I just
yeah,
had an impression that the Russians at the Saturn base wanted to do this too.
yeah, they did.
They did, yeah?
But yeah, it was for me, in my experience, it was a very separate context. Like I didn't experience too much of a direct relationship between the Russians on Earth and the Russians on Saturn. Um, aside from launching from Russia, but
Mm,
uh, yeah. But then earlier, I mean, back in the 70s, in and this is so when I'm talking about that time, it's before this body, because this body was born in the 80s. So
mm.
it's another body, and that
Oh,
person, yeah.
okay.
So
So
that
in the
that person
seven,
is,
okay, I'm sorry, in the 70s in Montauk, right?
yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
they would send us a lot of different places, especially for me, far Eastern Russia and Siberia, parts of Japan. They would send us there quite a lot.
Wow. To do what
Yeah.
exactly?
Yeah, I have a lot of memories with John, that we've been talking about a little bit, where we were in that area together, like in Vladivostok, and
Oh, I see. That mission.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He
places
talked
in the
about
east.
it.
Yeah,
So you guys went together to that Vladivostok
yeah.
mission.
Hmm.
Wow,
Yep.
interesting. And that was not you in this body. It was like a parallel or a past existence.
Um, Sometimes again, I'm not totally clear about this, but
I see.
um, because sometimes people remember me in this body in that time.
Oh,
Um, so it's not, there's something going on there that I don't understand yet, but um, as far as I'm aware, I was in a separate body for most of that time.
I see.
Um,
So it could have been an
yeah,
alter in a clone body or something.
something like that. I don't think so. Max was the name of the previous person. I don't think he was a clone. I think he was organic,
Hmm.
human.
An original.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I heard about this the mission to Vladivostok and also to the Urals, right? That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thing. Okay.
That place is so magical. I
What do you remember about the Urals?
Oh my gosh. I want to go back there as a free person. Um uh well, we went there at all different times yeah, through Montauk. So we really I know John and formed a very strong relationship to those mountains because they were something that stayed relatively the same during the different time periods.
Yeah.
Um uh yeah, what I mean, the missions themselves were pretty boring. Like, I mean, we were never happy to be there, and it was usually some very low vibration thing, like murder this person or blackmail that person, or
Oh,
just really boring, violent things. So, so, so the actual experience is maybe not that exciting.
oh, I see. But you said,
Yeah.
but what John was talking about is that this was an archaeological dig.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
those were the more interesting ones. Yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I think he experienced more of that than I did because
Okay.
he was able to stay. I mean, his orientation to physical space and the here and now is a lot stronger than mine. Like
Hmm.
again, it's an aptitude thing. They send you on the missions that they test you for. So John has a lot of clarity about spatial relationships. Um, and he's really able to stay present even in a clone body with different physical scenarios on the ground. He's very quick on his feet, um, and that's like that's what he was trained for. So he has much more experience than me of like going to retrieve objects or
I see.
do things that require a lot of dexterity physically. um, yeah, and I was much more of like I dissociate more easily and I go into the inner planes more easily. So they would use me for that kind of stuff.
Like what?
Um,
Like time oracle work?
for channeling, for navigating, stuff like that. A lot
I
of
see.
that.
So you
I
would
mean,
be like
we all
a
had to go on. We all had to do this dirty work, violent work. I was not exempt from that. Like I had to do a lot of like really nasty murder and sexual things and blackmail, but at the same time, like we had our different roles.
hmm.
So yeah,
Oh,
yeah, that was much more. I don't know if I was ever sent to actually retrieve an object because I wouldn't be as good at it.
okay. What else do you remember about the Urals? Just because you said that you had a bond with the
Yeah,
mountains.
yeah. Well, I mean, just as a place of nature, as a spiritual thing. I mean, um, I just feel, yeah, I feel the nature spirit's very strong there.
Okay.
I've had some encounters with Yeti there that I really treasure.
Wow.
I love those beings. Those are the most loving beings that I've encountered on Earth, probably. Um,
There in the Urals.
yeah, among other
Okay.
places, but yeah.
I see.
Um,
Did they say anything about what you were doing there? Did they have an opinion?
uh, well, they just sent me love. I mean, there's not much they could do. Um, Occasionally, they would basically try to plant a seed in me, serve
Hmm.
as like a guide. for me and give me like a telepathic impression that they knew I wouldn't understand in the moment, but years later could awaken something in me.
Wow, interesting.
So they're very wise in that way. So that definitely happened a few times.
Do you remember, like, generally what periods did they went in Montauk to Russia, and what did they do? Like,
Ooh, all over, all over. I
all
mean,
over the
there's so
history?
much. Some of it was uh, so before all of our current civilizations, there was a wide-ranging advanced civilization that stretched really across huge parts of Asia,
Mm-hmm.
Western Asia, like through Mongolia and Russia and
Mm-hmm.
in the parts of the Gobi Desert. And there was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
There was a massive civilization there, which I usually refer to as Ur. Um, I mean that's a name that I've seen that's resonated, just UR.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's very related to they had huge underground cities. A lot of Shambhala, like the
Mm-hmm.
mythical underground city, is very connected to that area of the world.
Yep.
That there's a reason all the myths are kind of coming from that area, because they have huge underground cities that are very ancient, and a lot of entrances. I don't know how many are still accessible, but entrances in the Gobi Desert, entrances in Mongolia and Russia, and it was a very beautiful, very advanced civilization. Um, uh, as far as the time frame goes, it's kind of hard to say, but probably something like 60,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
a very long
this is where
time.
you were going, right? To
That
to
was one of
to
the places.
to
Yeah.
retrieve things or to influence something?
Uh, yeah, definitely to steal things.
Okay. Technology mostly?
Um, yeah, well, usually ritual objects more than technology, because it was a lot about, this more magical kind of work that they were doing, black magic
Oh,
work.
okay.
Yeah. Occasionally it would be a piece of alien technology or something like that.
So what
But
was the purpose to steal a an artifact like that? To deprive that civilization from that kind of power? Maybe.
yeah, to steal the power, basically, as far
Interesting.
as I can tell.
Some maybe some resonating crystals and whatnot that help them hold their resonance. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they're
Interesting.
they're ancient, like sometimes Tibetan artifacts. John talks about that a little bit. Like I've seen like really ancient stuff from because the Lyrans were very, very involved in the civilization of Ur and in early Tibet. And
Mm-hmm.
the Lyrans, and specifically the Vagans from the Star Vega, they really created a lot of the groundwork for the Bon religion and the later Tibetan Buddhist religion.
Okay.
They were directly involved in all of that, and it's really their creation. Um,
Hmm.
as I see it. So there's a direct lineage. It's part of why it's so powerful in the present
So
day,
vegans,
because
not really Lyrans, but vegans, because it's a kind of a different. Uh,
yeah, I guess a bit of a different vibe, but it's in the constellation Lyra.
yeah,
So
I know. But
yeah,
I just know that there's been a rift a long time ago between them,
a little
as far
bit.
as.
Yeah, well, the vegans didn't. That's a whole story too. Yeah, um, they didn't get involved in the wars as much. And they really preferred to keep to themselves and to make these sort of enclaves of enlightenment energy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
What I think I read in Lissa Royale's material that the vegan mysticism is
Hmm.
the vegan tradition basically is the origin of all the Hindu, Tibet, and a lot of
Hmm.
Asian religions.
Yeah, I was so happy when I read that book and I saw that part of the book. I was like, "Oh my
Okay.
God, somebody actually wrote this!" Like
So you knew about this beforehand.
a little bit, although that book definitely helped me like to put it into words, because a lot of these things, especially when you've never been able to talk about them with anybody, they stay in this kind of semi-verbal space in your mind.
I see.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it really helps me to read these books also because it's like it helps me put words to things. It's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, and yeah.
Wow,
So I
interesting.
really love channel books like that.
So any other periods in Russia that you went that were like proper Russia to
Yeah.
try
Um,
anything that stands out? I mean, you don't have to remember
sure.
anything. Maybe some mission or specific,
Well, we
operation.
definitely in the 19th century we were there quite a lot.
Mm,
Uh, I mean the czars were of great interest to the whole czar lineage was of great interest to the Draconians. So I
and
definitely
that lineage was connected to what for them?
I'm guessing it would have to do with some of the Orion lineages, or that's my how I would relate to it anyway.
I see.
I spent many lifetimes in the Orion system, so just to tell you a little bit more about where I'm coming from. So when it comes to Orion, I have a lot of direct experience there from past lives.
Hmm.
Um, and I would guess that would be Orion lineage, which is for me very associated with uh, the Christian traditions and Eastern Orthodoxy and stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, and
So
they
is
def
that a positive Orion culture?
it's kind of both positive and negative. Yeah,
I
it's
mean
both.
it's also polarized, yes.
Yeah, yeah, very
So
much.
what was their interest? The Draco. I mean, by the Draco there you mean the Orion Syndicate, right? What John refers to as the Orion Syndicate, not the
Yeah,
Empire.
that's a good name for it, Syndicate. It's also from Star Trek, but
Yeah,
Star Trek has a lot of soft disclosure on it, so
sure,
that's
sure.
um
Yeah. So
um
what was their interest in the Tsar lineage and that 19th century time specifically? Do
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I would guess it's also for kind of bloodline like manipulation purposes.
Okay.
Um
Anything else on the Saturn base that might be of interest?
well, I kind of described it in our earlier talk.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it was very like 60s, 70s Soviet kind of feeling to it. So, um,
Did you say
uh,
that they were drinking and womanizing a lot?
this is true. Yeah, that's
Really?
true.
was
Yeah.
this was this part of their own mind control program or something?
Well, it's part of the culture.
Part of the
Yeah.
culture. How would they
Yeah,
womanize then if because they were like much more men than women and they would have to like
definitely more men in the parts that I experienced.
okay. So
I mean, I kind of already
would they go off to a different facility somewhere or
there were a few women there and they were heavily sexually harassed.
oh wow.
uh, yeah, I mean that was the norm at the time.
So they weren't like moral communist staunch
Well,
communist
I'm sure they
party
would
members.
pay. I'm sure they would pay lip service to that idea.
But space
But in
changes.
practice,
But
yeah,
space does change people, right?
yeah, I guess so. Um,
And the drinking. Oh yeah, by the way, you said that the Americans wanted you to like gather intel on the
yeah,
Russians. What did they want to find out? Like anything or any specific things?
I don't even know. I
Okay,
mean, yeah, I did my best to describe it before, so I should probably just let that stand.
I see.
I mean, I think I probably mentioned I did talk about that. Like, yeah, I had training to remember conversations verbatim and just repeat them,
Hmm.
but I never often I would not understand why people were interested in the conversation. Like they didn't share what the goals were with me. They just, ordered me to do this and repeat it. So I just did, like,
And
yeah,
the Russians weren't talking about anything of interest.
not really, as far as I could tell. Yeah,
Okay.
just ordinary people.
Okay.
Yeah, in an
Interesting.
extraordinary situation.
Again, I want to repeat the question. Did they have another? Could they go to another facility, another base, someone else's base to like I don't know to go to a bar or something or
Uh, yeah, I mean, they got off base. There are a lot of places to go. I mean, there are space program installations all over the solar system and beyond. It's a wide network.
You mean the
And
Soviets or just everybody?
well, everybody, obviously
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of trading. I mean, like there was a Japanese facility that was
Mm-hmm.
like somewhat nearby, and a lot of the Soviets would go over, I believe, go over to the Japanese
Mm.
base and come back, and there was a relatively free exchange
Mm.
there, as far as I could tell, um, and yeah, there definitely um, a lot of the factions were friendly enough with each other that these sorts of things could happen.
I
Yeah,
see. So the Japanese you're referring to are actually the Earth Japanese, right? Not the breakaway
uh,
Japanese.
I think so. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, because the breakaway Japanese would have much more advanced technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So these were like still like Earth level SSPs, right? That
Yeah.
were around.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Wow. Like you mean they would go over by ship, right? Because the base was not on the
Uh,
same asteroid, or
yeah, I think by ship. I mean, I don't know if I went over there, but
yeah.
yeah, probably by shuttle, yeah.
Oh. What kind of food did they eat at the Saturn base?
It was mostly real food. It wasn't replicator food.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Occasionally we get some replicator food, but they didn't really have the replicator tech that like the Americans did. So
So they had like
um,
canteen food.
essentially, and they had
Okay.
actually some pretty what I thought was good cooking. Um, they had like actual um, fresh ingredients.
Wow.
I probably some of them hydroponically grown.
Hmm.
Very ordinary technology, really. Um, yeah, so they definitely had grow rooms. They had places where they were growing things. Um, there are even there were some livestock, there were animals.
On the base.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a big place, and it was, part of it was built into this asteroid, so they had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of space to work with.
Oh
They had
wow.
many levels, so much square footage, so they could do a lot of stuff like that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so the last subject I think was about, I don't know if this was with the Russians or not. You said that they were trying to or did use you with their breeding program or something?
Yeah. Well, that's sadly that was what everybody used me for, regardless of my aptitude. Because my bloodline is very sought after by all
Yeah.
the different factions. So yeah, I would be raped by, or I would have to rape many different women from all backgrounds, humans, non-humans, all nations
Wow.
of Earth. I mean, that was
Couldn't they just take your sperm from you or something?
I believe that also happened, but uh yeah, definitely. I mean, I recall this is a separate experience, not on the Russian base, but Uh, I do recall some of the negative zeta reticulins, the grays,
Hmm.
operating on my testicles and trying to use some of my sperm. So that also happened. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I
but
just wonder why would they need to like use you physically to do this because they could just take your, material and do whatever.
yeah, well, it's all done. I mean, nothing's off limits. They don't have any morals about these things, so they'll just do whatever they can. Like, and I'm speaking very broadly about a lot of different
Yeah, yeah,
groups.
yeah. What about the
Yeah.
Russians though?
Um, I think I was hooked up with a few women. It wasn't with the same intensity, but I'm pretty sure I was
Hmm.
bred there.
I see.
Um, and I don't quite understand how that works because I was pre-puberty in the memories that I
Yeah.
have on the Russian base. So there's something off about that, uh, but I do have some memory like that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe not you personally, but then at the base, do you remember any signs of this, I don't know, cloning, any kind of this genetic stuff being done just to, as a support for this memory?
As far as I don't think they had a big cloning facility there. There were
Hmm.
clones present at the base. There were a
Okay.
lot of clones mixed in with the personnel, but
All right.
um, but I don't think it was an active cloning facility.
I see.
Um, they did have the technology in Russia at the time, although it probably wasn't as widespread as it was among the Americans. Um, the Americans are cloning addicts. I mean, they they're totally ruthless with it, and they'll just use it for anything they can think of. Um, it's I really don't like it, but most of the other groups were like pretty a little more mindful about it, um, and and there were I knew some of the people there were clones, but I they had come from elsewhere. You know, they had come from Earth and other places. I
How
don't
would
think
you tell that they were clones? Because of their energy, or they were
uh
like looked alike? They were several like in the group that looked alike, or what?
for me it's mostly energy because that's what I'm paying attention to a lot of the time.
I
Um,
see. So you could
everybody
tell like
perceives,
right away that someone was a clone of
yeah,
a
more or
copy of
less.
an original person. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very different energy.
Oh, I
Uh,
see.
it's very different. Yeah.
Is it the
I'm not
same soul though in your worldview?
no, it's usually not. It's usually a different soul.
Okay.
Um,
A different
yeah.
soul or an alter.
Yeah.
So what's your take on the alters then? Do you think that because I've heard different perspectives, obviously, and
Yeah.
everybody
Well, a
has their
clone,
own. Yeah.
it also really depends how the clone is made. Most of the experiences I've had, the clone is basically a vessel, and
Yeah.
any consciousness can be put in it, whether it's from the original person or from some completely other place. Um,
So
yeah,
if you have a clone of you, for example, is that the same
which
soul
I
as you?
do.
It's just bilocating, which you do. Yeah.
No, it's not my soul. I have so many clones. I still have so many clones. They're cloning me to this day. I still have new clones
Right.
being made. And I hate it. I mean, it's such a violation, but what I'm able to do is to keep my soul separate from those clones. Like
I
there's
see.
nothing actually of my soul going into them. They're still
Wow.
being used, and you know, it's still an insult to my lineage and all that. But I've developed the power now that I can keep my soul separate from it. That took
But
a lot of practice.
I see. So, but usually when they make an altar, for example, is that part of that of your soul, of the original soul that goes to that altar body?
Uh, yeah,
Okay.
basically.
Okay.
Altars are complex. Usually you just have altars in the same body.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if you have an altar, if it's your altar, it's part of your soul. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And you're basically like what you would call a bilocation or a multi-location situation.
Sort of. I'm usually you're just in one place at a time, usually. It depends how much soul material you have in you. Um, like for instance, I've been referencing that I have multiple souls in this body, so I was farmed out to different clone bodies on a very, very extensive basis, and
Hmm.
different souls in this body were moved to different clones and etc.
Wow.
Um, but everyone has a different capacity for that kind of thing, you know,
Sure.
without dying or going insane. So, uh, for the most part, you're really just in one place at one time. And if your soul gets moved, then that's where your attention and your mind moves. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So I guess this is not the last time we talk because it's an ongoing remembering process.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into. It's a wide world,
Yeah.
and all of this stuff deserves to come to light, and I hope to play my part in that process. So yeah, definitely.